Hi, I'm excited you're back. This second video is about fat shaming. It comes from a specific type of negative response that I got from the last video. The last video posted about stuff that was going on in UCSC last quarter received a huge amount of positive feedback that blew me away, and it received a significant amount of critical feedback that led to really useful conversations. And those things are great. What I'm talking about today are specific types of comments that just made fun of me for being fat that have no use being anywhere. These kind of comments were, the easy ones to understand were like, "Shut up, you fat whore." Someone called me a whale. They think they're being clever. I really like whales, so I don't really consider it an insult. And there were like comments that said like, "I'm only feminist because I'm fat and ugly," which I can tell you is not true. The scariest comment that I received in the YouTube comments before I disabled them was, there were multiple, and it was this line of reasoning that said, "You're so fat that I wouldn't rape you." My first reaction to that is like, way to not get my point. Like, I hope you never do, no matter what weight I'm at. Like, I do not consider that an insult. But I think it stems from this underlying logic of, you know, you aren't lovable because you're fat. That you should feel blessed or feel lucky if I want to non-consensually have sex with you because you're not going to have sex otherwise. Which I can tell you, A, is not accurate, but also is really harmful. It's like that kind of stuff, like, no one wants to hear that. Now, those kind of hurtful comments could have really destroyed someone who was posting on YouTube or in real life, but which makes them totally not okay. But I can walk away from them because I understand the reasons that being thin is what's popular today. So my logic is, back in times where food was really scarce, where there was a lot of famine, it was really popular, or the ideal was to be fat. Because if you were fat, it means that you were wealthy. You were wealthy enough to not have to work in the fields, to not have to starve. So like, I'm sure that they're like, gods were fat and like they worshipped fat women. Like, it was great to be fat. In a lot of the same way, it makes sense today that it is great to be thin, or that the ideal is to be thin. Because we have such an excess of food around, and especially fast foods that aren't as healthy for you, that like, to be thin means that not only do you have the money to pay for the organic food or the vegetables or the whole wheat, but it also means that you have this like self-control to go to the gym. The self-control to go. Gyms always make me laugh because like, we've built up all this technology over centuries to never have to lift a finger, and then we use that technology to exercise because we realize that it's necessary. So being thin means that you are working harder. In this day and age, it does. It means, and it makes sense because the ideal is what's harder to achieve, and being thin today is what's harder to achieve. And I understand that. Now, it's also worth it to think about the fact that the United States has this idea that if you work hard enough, you can get to where you want to be. And while I think that's true in some cases, I don't think it's true as a blanket statement, and especially when we're talking about weight, it's not true that everyone can reach the thinnest, or a very thin ideal that they would want to. Whether it's genetics, whether it's by the amount of money that they can spend on healthy food, or a lot of other factors. I think it's important to recognize that just because we hold something to an ideal doesn't mean that it's necessarily achievable, and to treat it like it is always achievable, and that if someone isn't achieving the ideal of being thin, it's because they're lazy or don't care or are greedy or aren't trying hard enough. Those assumptions are just untrue. The weird thing to me is that we would never, you know, if we see someone that's super physically fit, we would never say like, "Oh, do you keep up on your reading? Like, can I talk to you about current events? Can you hold an intellectual conversation with me? Like, do you have healthy relationships in your life?" We would never ask those kinds of things because all those things are assumed. But we ask them to people who are fat. We say, like, we make assumptions about their intellectual capabilities, their emotional capacities, their self-control, their interpersonal relationships that I don't think are warranted. So you may be thinking at this point, okay, Cynthia, I get what you mean, but what about health? What if I really care about the people around me being healthy? And I think it's a legitimate question, and there are 3 things that I want to say to it in response. So the first one is, health does not always equal weight. It's not an equivalent relationship. And I know that you'll understand me when I tell you to think about friends you have who are really thin and eat crap all the time. And they're thin because their bodies do that. Their metabolisms are fast or whatever reason. But they're not necessarily healthy. And I think that if the question was really about health, it would be addressed to everyone, because unless you know somebody's eating habits and like exercise regimen, you don't know if they're healthy. It's not what shows when you look at them. So the second part of my response is that I don't feel like I see the same concern about health when it goes to the other extreme of the spectrum, which is eating disorders. I think eating disorders are a really, really prevalent problem, especially in the United States. And I don't see the same kind of concern. And I think that the concern would be different whether someone had an eating disorder and looked really sickly and looked really thin, or like looked kind of healthy or at normal weight and had an eating disorder. I don't think there'd be as much concern addressed to that individual, and like that's weird to me, because I think if it were really about health, again, it wouldn't be as much about how you looked as the health of the person. That eating disorders are kind of saying, like, I don't want to be fat to the extent that I would risk being hospitalized, and I don't think that that's healthy, but that's not usually part of the conversation. It makes me think about the BMI chart at my doctor's office, that I'm right in the category of obese, like by like just a sliver. And I know that I am overweight, but I am not obese. But you have to look at the other end of the spectrum too, which says that 100 pounds would be healthy for me because I'm just above 5 feet tall. But I can tell you for a fact that if I were 100 pounds, I would not be healthy. I'd be in the hospital. Like, there's no way that my body could do that. I could stand to lose a little bit of weight, but the chart is kind of skewed for somebody whose body isn't mine. And so I think my point with that is that oftentimes the other end of the chart that's about being overweight and obese is like really, really spotlighted when it comes to health, and that being underweight is not given as much importance. And I think if you're genuinely concerned about health, the whole chart has to have value. So the third and final point that I want to make, and arguably the most important point in the video, is that if you're really concerned about someone's health, fat shaming is not the way to go about it. That if you care about someone being healthy, your care for their physical health has to be matched by your care that they're emotionally healthy, that they're involved in healthy relationships, that they're academically healthy or healthy in their job performance. And all those things are interconnected. That if you're willing to make someone feel awful about themselves under the guise of, oh, well, I want them to be healthy, it's like you're only caring about one section of their health, which is the physical health, and you're not caring about their health as an entire person. In that case, I would challenge you to think about what kind of health you prioritize over other kinds of health. And the reason I think it's important is that if you know, it can be like, oh, it can be a matter of concern, like, oh, I just want to make sure someone's healthy as a person, but I don't think it's actually valuing them as a person. It's seeing them as a target for their weight. But if you value them as a person, you want to care about every part of them. And I think the reason that I find it so important to make this video is that it's almost like by being fat, we're seen like we're looked at as less than people, as less than human. And there isn't enough representation of fat people who are happy and who have friends and who are doing well. it's like a radical act. I was reading an article today. It's a radical act to be fat and happy, and like that shouldn't be radical at all. And like, so I'm here to say, like, I exercise to the extent that I want to, eat relatively healthy to the extent that I'm happy with, and I have a huge number of friends who I love. I have a huge number of classes that I'm doing well in and things I enjoy thinking about. My life is stable, and I'm really good where I am, and I can do all that stuff while being somewhat fat. And it's not the end of the world. And like the most important thing is, like, I can still love myself even if I don't fit into the standard of thinness that's around. I can still love myself, and like I can find people who love me no matter what I look like. And it's actually really important for me to know that someone loves me no matter what I look like, because if they didn't, like, that's not good enough. Like, I know that I'm not worth it, and other people have to know that too. And the same thing applies to you, that you better love the people in your life and love yourself no matter what you look like, because that is just dumb. So, thanks for sticking around. I hope it means something, and I'm excited to see you next time. Have a good week.